watching yourself almost descend perhaps into madness, because it's not me, right? It's a story, but that part of me that knows what it's like to spiral out of control.
So was the writing of this therapeutic for you?
I think it is. I don't even realize it until the end. I think every book I've written as I write them is my favorite, because it's like it's a part of me right now in my
Right.
experience that I'm reflecting back on the page. Hello and welcome to the Thriller Pitch Podcast, the director's cut of the thriller book world. Today, I'm your guest, Mark Nadon, because we have a podcast takeover to talk about my book releasing today, my psychological tech thriller, The Treatment Room. And joining me as my takeover host is Todd Severin, author of his award-winning medical thriller, Deadly Vision. Todd, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun. I've enjoyed reading the book, and congrats on having it released today.
Thank you. And thank you for reading it and providing all that feedback. That meant a lot. It always helps make the book stronger, having all that feedback.
Oh, you bet. Anything I can do to help. It didn't need much from me, trust me. So let's, as the host of this show now, let's move right into it, shall we? And give us the pitch for your new book, The Treatment Room.
Yeah, so The Treatment Room's a psychological tech thriller. So think immersive virtual reality therapy gone terribly wrong. It focuses on Lucas, who's a psychologist who's with a patient when the police kick down his door and arrest his client for multiple murders. His client goes to the media and thanks Lucas for guiding him in these murders. And overnight, Lucas is branded as a therapist who guided a serial killer. So Lucas is freaking out. He's suspended at work. He's doesn't know what to do. So he decides he's going to investigate himself to clear his name. So he looks at his case notes from earlier with his client, finds a link to an immersive virtual reality therapy clinic called Pinnacle Therapeutics. And he goes there as a client, but finds himself very quickly addicted to the technology and the immersive therapy that he's going through. And even though he's a psychologist and he knows what's happening to him, he's practically powerless to stop, because the more he digs, the closer he thinks he's getting to the truth. And the closer to the truth, the more he's losing his sense of self and his own autonomy. His sister Amara is an investigative journalist. So she's one of the other main characters in the book. She's also investigating a murder, and she finds a link between that murder and also in Pinnacle Therapeutics. But instead of going in as a patient, she goes in as she ends up in a relationship with the CEO. At the same time, there's this stalker in the background, and she's not sure if she's in danger. She's not sure who she can trust. And she can see Lucas, as the book goes on, losing himself, and she feels like she has to be the one to solve it, to help save her brother. So if you like the dark psychology characters of like a Karen Slaughter and the advanced technological manipulation of like a J.P. Delaney, you will love The Treatment Room.
Yeah, I thought it was, first of all, it's a very good story. And the way you just described it sounds so complex, yet it doesn't flow as it's a mixed bag. It's a very well told story. All of those seemingly disparate storylines all do come together. Before we talk about that, though, and the craft of how you created that, tell us what started this idea. I mean, a virtual reality, immersive psychotherapy gone wrong. Where'd that come from?
Well, it's actually started as the Genesis Project Book 2. So the Genesis Project is it is the first book I released. It has immersive virtual technology used to treat post-traumatic stress in soldiers. My original plan was to have a book 2 where we go from the military to commercial application, and then that commercial application does its own terrible thing. But I decided to stay away from the military background when I started working on The Treatment Room, and pulled away from the Genesis Project 2 because it's in a military background. It's set in kind of a military environment. I didn't want someone coming to The Treatment Room to feel like, oh, if this is book 2, then I have to read book 1, which is military, and I don't like military, so I'm not going to bother. I wanted people to come straight into The Treatment Room. So I decided, instead of Genesis Project book 2, and there are hints, if you've read the Genesis Project, there are hints in the book of how Pinnacle Therapeutics took that technology from the government, which is all the Genesis Project, but officially it's not connected. So that's where the idea it originally came from. I had already written that very concept with immersive virtual reality technology. And then from there, it was a question of what do I want it to do and how do I want it to impact people. And I find the question of autonomy and whether or not we actually, in the face of advancing technology, are still making our own decisions or still have our own opinions, and how much of that we're losing as it goes along. So I kind of touched on that in the story as well.
Yeah, it certainly does. It touches on quite a few ethical and philosophical questions relating to advanced technology. So thanks for your explanation on that, relating it back to the Genesis Project, which then brings up two very quick questions. And the first one is, step back again now to the Genesis Project. And how did you start thinking of this idea of immersive virtual reality as psychotherapy? And what was your fascination with it that has now spawned 2 novels?
Originally, the Genesis Project, I was reading a book by, I think it was JD Middick. He was a Canadian sniper. And during this book, it's his biography. It was called Canadian Sniper, I believe. And he was talking about how when he came back from war, how much he struggled with PTSD and how it cost him how his family and things. And he was talking about how all that trauma and how there was a lack of help and support for it. That's what sparked the idea for, like, what if we could help these soldiers? What if there was a way to do it? And then because I love the idea of advancing technology, I was just like, well, what if we could take their nightmares, the trauma that they went through, and what if we could, through virtual reality, slowly shift what they thought that happened into something less traumatic so that they're able to cope with it and then the nightmare stop. So they weren't, in the Genesis Project, they're not removing the nightmare. They're alleviating some of the worst symptoms by slowly manipulating the memory through the technology.
Oh, that's very cool. I haven't read the Genesis Project, so that's very cool concept that you had there. And having read The Treatment Room, I will vouch for the fact that you do not have to have read the Genesis Project to get into this book. And I find it interesting because we both of our novels, The Treatment Room as well as my novel Deadly Vision, we're all focused upon virtual reality. It seems to be kind of a endless avenue to explore different concepts. So even though The Treatment Room and Genesis Project before that are based on this very high-tech concept, the book isn't really about the technology, is it?
No.
So how would you describe the book? How do you feel the through story of the book reads?
For me, well, there's a lot to it because this book and the characters were quite personal in many ways. But for me, it was like the psychology of someone losing their own autonomy, someone slowly breaking down. So it has that mix. His sister also, which plays a key role. So the dynamic of family in a situation where one member of the family is breaking down and the desperation to want to help.
Yeah, I mean, you really explore a lot of family dynamics, starting with the father going down through the children. What was your impetus to dig into those concepts?
Good question. I think it just came as a result of sort of writing the characters themselves when I started exploring the story. Even though the prologue touches on, well, the prologue's a hint to what may be going on in the background. That's not what I wrote first. I wrote the story. I learned who the characters were. And I knew I wanted a background of some psychological damage there in order to have the book work, I guess, the way that it worked out. I wanted the characters to have this troubled past, but I also wanted them to have like a sense of hope that trauma from childhood doesn't make us, like, yes, statistically, people who experience a lot of trauma in their childhood do end up being, violent or things, but it's not in every case. In some cases, there is hope. And this book plays with that balance of what is there hope, or was there hope, and was it lost because of the technology or not? And then his sister, in that, even though they were both traumatized and they both went through all these things, they still love each other and are there for each other despite their both traumatic upbringings.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. In fact, it seems that because of the trauma or in spite of the trauma, it's drawn these two very different characters into a world of understanding of each other, which really heightens the drama when, as you said, the main character, Lucas, starts to break down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that Amara's responses were very believable.
Thank you.
So then, would you say that the through story of this is one of, by way of the technology, characters learning the value of a family and of healing from trauma?
Yeah, for sure. And the question of what happens when that is challenged. It almost has a reverse. Well, I don't want to give away spoilers, but it sort of has that reverse arc where they went from childhood where everything was horrible, and then they went, when we start the book, essentially things are fine and they're adapted normal people, and then things go in a reverse direction where they go back to the
Yeah,
dark. And it's like, how, that was the different play. It's not bringing bad people to good or good to bad.
no, and that was very well done, by the way. So talk to us about the crafting of that. I mean, you have these two main characters, Amara and Lucas, who really are the driving forces behind the story, and they each have their own separate story arcs that are intermingling, and you tell the story through both points of view. That's a lot to craft. How did you tackle that?
Mostly one chapter at a time. I use Scrivener. I have a terrible memory because I have so much going on. So I use Scrivener as my way of keeping track of things that are going on with the characters. For me, it's like my filing system. It has, every character, it has their strengths, what they're struggling with. So when I develop a character and I have all these things through Scrivener, every chapter I write, I go back to that character sheet and I'll read through who they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to be doing, what their struggles are, and then I'll write the chapter, because otherwise I have a really hard time. So how does Lucas not sound like Amara? How is like his experiences and what he falls back on not the same as hers? It's like, well, I have to go back and relearn my character with every chapter essentially that I write. And then when I finished the book, I went through the book as Amara and then I went through the book as Lucas to try and make sure that, okay, this voice is the same.
So in crafting that, first of all, are you an outliner or are you a pantser?
I would say in between a planter, do they call it? Planter, planning and outline. Yeah, no, I would say I'm in between. So for this book, it's different with every book, and it's interesting because the Genesis project went through many, many, many drafts, and that one I was pantsed. I had no idea. Like I had the
Yeah,
initial idea of virtual reality tech, and I wanted the military, and then I just went in and wrote what I wanted to write. With the treatment room, it was a mix of, I started with an outline. Well, I had the Genesis project too. I had a vague idea of that. So I changed that outline to figure out what I wanted to do. For the most part, I had a good idea of the book and what it was going to be in a sort of 500 word synopsis, I guess you could say. So it wasn't very detailed. And then I had a mock-up of the cover done. I just did it because I wanted to like have this visual of what, this treatment room. It's not the same as the cover is now because that was done by an artist, but initially I always, when I start a book, or at least I certainly do now, I'd create a mock-up of the cover to try and bring the book to life, and then I get it professionally done later. So
that's
that
very cool. I like that idea.
so that's how I start a book. And then I used to do a lot of outlining, like chapter by chapter and things. And then I found when I got to know the characters that everything just changed. And this book was the same. If you read the outline and I still have it because I keep everything. The original outline for this book, you would be like, oh, that's quite different than what it turned out to be. And that's because
Right,
when I learn these characters and you get into these moments and these situations, the first half of the book is it's pretty close to the outline because I've been thinking about the first half. But the second half, and especially the final third, is almost completely done by feel. It's like, who are these
right.
people, and what could happen next and what's going to happen next.
You still have an overriding story arc in mind, though. You know where you need to get to. Do you have the conclusion already in mind at that point?
I didn't, no. And in this one, actually, I had to stop where I did because the original outline went quite a bit further. So
Oh
I don't
wow.
want to. We could
Okay.
always talk about that at the end of at the end of the episode when we go to spoilers, because I don't want to give away the end of this one. But it actually went quite a bit further. The outline. Yeah, I guess I can't really talk about more without spoiling it. But yeah,
Okay.
it went further. So no, I had to make this work because I was already at like 105,000 words, and I felt like the biggest part of the story had been told. So if I continue with my original outline, it was almost like I would have a whole other book, which I sort of could write a whole other book, continuing what I just did. So
We'll look for treatment room part two.
yeah.
That's interesting. 105,000 words. It was that the finished word count?
It's 98,000 now in the finished product. Yeah.
Wow. I'm surprised. It reads faster than that.
Thank you. That's a
You know,
compliment.
100,
Yeah.
well, it does. It's a huge compliment. 100,000 words, that's roughly a 400-page book. And
Yeah.
that's an undertaking, and if it's not a riveting story with compelling characters, it can be a slog, but it doesn't read like that. It reads much faster. It took me a little time to read it only because I read before I go to bed. And so it's indeterminate how much I'll be able to get through before the Kindle drops out of my hand onto my lap.
And you get hit in the
But
face with the
no, it
Kindle.
was, yeah, no, it reads much faster than that. And it's definitely a page turner to the point that you always want to know what's going to happen. So that's a testament to the craft that you did do.
Thank you.
And
That
I
was
certainly
that was
understand.
intentional.
I hope so. I mean, that's good writing,
I
right?
tried to
That's
keep
you're supposed to do.
I tried to keep every chapter to about 1,500 words because I knew I wanted that. Even if it's not action thriller and car chases and guns and explosions, I still wanted, like you said, that feeling like you're constantly moving forward. So slightly shorter chapters, trying to keep to 1,500 didn't always work that way. You know how it is. Sometimes it's a
Yeah.
little shorter, sometimes longer. And ending each chapter with a little bit of a hook, which is the job,
Right.
I guess, to and a thriller to move you forward. So
Right.
always looking for that hook. Oh, this is the perfect moment to try and string you along.
Yeah.
And then you're in Lucas's head, and then you have to read Lucas in order to get back into Amara's head. But now you want to know what happened to Lucas, and then you're back and forth.
Right. And it's really interesting when both of their heads are kind of in the same place, but perhaps temporally they're in the same place, but just staggered a little bit. So you're really bopping back and forth a little. For example, some scenes when they're both in Pinnacle, and you're getting two views of the same essential moments of time. I found that was very effective the way you did that.
Thank you.
If there's any new writers who are reading this, or experienced writers who are listening to this show, they'll know that craft is a very difficult thing to master, to gather how you're going to actually tell the story. And you have an idea. So it sounds to me like your idea started with the technology because it's an offshoot of technology that you already explored. You're reinventing it for a new commercial aspect rather than government, which is cool.
Yeah.
So then you had to create characters to tell the story. But at that point, you didn't have a through story yet. So crafting those characters actually became the narrative vehicle with which your own concept of how the story was going to be told came to fruition.
Yeah.
How did you craft those characters then? I mean, that's a big deal. It's not, that's a big deal. You can't just sweep that away. That's like, oh, I had, Lucas and Amara, and they're these people, and blah, blah, blah. It's like craft is so important for a story to actually work. This could have gone off the rails in so many different ways.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So just talk to us a little bit about your character creation.
It's often, it's interesting how we think about characters and how there are always parts of us within our characters. And one of the things that I do almost unconsciously, because I don't necessarily notice it until the book comes out is that I take a piece of a known experience or something of mine, and I put that into the character so that I know that they become even more real to me. So, like, as an example
Right.
with Amara, like her lack of trust in people and in men and things, that, like, I know what that feels like, to have a lack of trust in people because of things that have happened in my life. And so that brought her to life for me, because from there it's like, okay. And then once I picked her occupation as an investigative journalist, it was almost easy enough to bring her to life from there, just a piece at a time, because that was like, okay, that's a big part of who she is someone who's trying to find trust and she's not sure. And with Lucas, it was his rock climbing and his, I know what it's like to have that psychological decline where you're not, things are getting so dark and so bad where you're like, I don't know if I can do this anymore or take this anymore. Like that slow watching yourself almost descend, in this case perhaps into madness, because it's not me, right? It's a story, but that part of me that knows what it's like to slowly go, spiral out of control. So really, that with Lucas and Amara, that's where it started. It was like those two pieces of myself, and then I just kind of went from there.
So, in any ways, was the writing of this therapeutic for you?
I think it is. I don't even realize it until the end. I think every book I've written as I write them is my favorite, because it's like it's a part of me right now in my
Right.
experience that I'm kind of reflecting back on the page. So I would say it is probably fairly fairly therapeutic, yeah, to put those
Yeah. I
characters
think
out
that,
there. And perhaps that's what makes it, this book, for me, one of the most nerve-wracking I've had to put out into the world, because there is that
oh,
reflection of myself
okay.
in there. And even if people hate it, because I know people will, it's the nature of the
Yeah.
business. No one gets 100% love, but it's almost that there's that, but the story is so personal to me.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, because anybody who writes has a full moment of being naked and just being completely
Yeah,
exposed. Now, most of the time, just on the surface level, that's based on the writing and the storytelling itself. It's like, you're not a very good writer. Oh, this sucks. Or you did it well. But there's always the part of you that's going to have the fear of taking something you've created and putting it out into the world and having no idea how it's going to be received.
yeah,
I think that's probably universal for all writers. But then on top of that, you have the emotional overlay that you're really taking parts of you and opening them up.
yeah.
And even though it's not you, it's a character, you still are exposing a part of you that you probably don't tell people on a regular basis.
That's right.
This
Yeah,
is almost your way of bringing to forth your ability to talk about something that you don't tell the average guy walking down. Hey, by the way, did you, I had this trauma when I was 8,
yeah,
you know, and I know what that's like. I mean, in Deadly Vision, I did, there's a lot of very painful moments in that book. And those all came from my childhood or my situation. And I know when you're writing those, you have to find the way that you can express the reality of what it is that you are feeling and what you've experienced without dropping into melodrama or
yeah.
overreactions or making it sappy. And you just hope that it resonates with somebody. You must have had a lot of feelings of exposure that way.
Yes. And I still do. It hasn't, well, releasing today, but even with, with beta readers and with my developmental editor, who was the first to read the book. Yeah, it's a very nerve-wracking moment where you just hope that people enough people really enjoy the story. You know how much work goes into it, right? It's like months and months of thinking and writing and planning, and it's so much.
Although, having said that, don't you find the best moments are when the writing's happening without thinking?
The writing itself, yes.
Did you get those moments where it's like the story's just going and it's taking you places you never even imagined because it's coming from some place inside of you that's being envisioned or embodied through these characters?
Yeah, I think that's why the second half always does whatever it does, because I'm so into these characters and these moments. That's why I never force an outline on the second half of the book, even if I have an idea, because of that. Because this it just becomes so real, and it's like I'm just telling. It almost feels like you're just telling these characters stories. You know, like they're just
Right.
giving them to you through them, or through you. You're passing on the story.
Right. Yeah. I've never been somebody who's believed in the like the real, touchy feely. Oh, I'm an author and I let the muse speak. I've just not been like that.
Yeah,
And you hear authors talking about how the characters will reveal themselves, or the characters will do things you didn't expect them to do, or I didn't realize my main character is actually the villain, sort of thing. It's
yeah,
like, well, how did you not realize that? You're writing the damn book.
yeah,
But it happens.
yeah.
Can you speak to that? How do you think that process just evolves?
I don't know. I Part of it is that it's like a movie playing as I'm writing the book. And sometimes I feel like I'm just watching the movie like everybody else. And I just happen to be putting it down into words. And it's true, although it's true that I think of it as like when my characters there are twists, or, well, not so much twists, but things that come up throughout the book that I didn't see coming. And those are things that I had to go back into the beginning and set them up, because I was like, oh,
Right.
that's who that was. So because I go off the rails a little bit in the second half as I'm feeling out the story. Yeah, sometimes a twist comes up and I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that's how this was going to go, but it feels like the right thing to do. I planned this, but now that I'm here, it feels like this is the right thing to do.
Well, for the listeners who haven't read the book yet, just so they know, when you say going off the rails in the second half, that's your writing. The story never goes off the rails. The story always stays solid. But I get what you're saying. It's like what's going to happen, and
Yeah,
it's a strange feeling when you don't even know what's going to happen in your own book.
yeah,
Deadly Vision did that to me. I had no idea how I was going to end this. I had all these disparate storylines. It's like, what? How do I get out of this?
yeah.
And, and so it's cool when that stuff all kind of just comes together for you.
Yeah. How do you find that comes together for you? Is it the same way where you're here, where you're kind of feeling characters out as they go? Is it playing like a movie for you in that sense?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that I would say I'm pretty much like you are, a plantser, if that's a word. I think I outline a little bit more detailed than you do, in the sense, but then I haven't seen your outline. But I do try to bring my outline all the way through the end, and with careful attention to what the critical points are going to be and how I'm going to get there. But when you're actually writing those scenes, I don't restrict myself to anything I might have thought in advance. You go with it at the
Yeah.
time. And that's a question I'd like to ask you is, as you're going with it, how have you learned to trust yourself, to trust your process of what you're putting down on the page? Or do you trust it?
I trust that I can do whatever I want in the first draft. and I hope that it works. Sometimes it doesn't. I've rewritten entire second halves of books before, not recently because I'm
Right.
kind of gotten the hang of it, I guess you could say. I've written a lot of novels and only published some. But yeah, that's what it is. It's just that first draft for me is I allow it to be whatever it's going to be. I just let the words go. Like I have that outline, but at the same time, like if the writing's terrible, it's terrible. I'm going to write 1,500 to 2,000 words every day. This is probably the quickest book I wrote, The Treatment Room, as far as like it just flowed so well. I think I wrote the first draft in 3 months, and I never thought like, oh, I have to go back and do this right now, or I have to rewrite this, or this is junk, I need to start over, or I need, like, it was just, no, the first draft is going to be what it's going to be. And then in the second draft, that's where sometimes most of the magic happens.
So you work with the developmental editor,
Yeah.
and you had beta readers involved as well. So talk to us about that. There might be a new writer who wants to know what it's like to work with a developmental editor. Of course, you can only give your experience, but um, how does this work? You start off by tossing ideas around, you turn in an outline, you start writing the draft, and then work with the editor on it. How do you do it?
For the developmental side, editor side, I write the first draft myself. I write the second draft, or I fix it up in the second draft to make it as clean as I can. Then that's the draft that goes to the developmental editor. she'll go
Mm-hmm.
through it all and give me like a high level, like all that plot, character, here's what you need to do, this doesn't make sense, or this wasn't working. And then in the manuscript itself, she also makes notes along the way about how certain things felt, things I may want to change, ways I need to reword this. It's all very high level stuff. So when you think of copy editing and line editing, which comes later, developmental editing is all, it's all high level. It's big picture. One of the hardest parts of writing this book was probably the beta reader feedback, because when you get beta reader, I was lucky enough to have a lot of beta readers for this book. And when you get,
What's a lot? What's a number?
I had 22 beta readers like offer to do it. And I think I got 12 or 15, 12 to 15. I'd have to actually count 12 to 15 responses on people who actually gave feedback. But what happens is, at my level, I don't have a staff or anything. So I don't have someone creating a spreadsheet and coming up with like averages and what everyone thought, which is what you hope to do, right? You bring together, the goal is to bring together, if 5 people thought this, then this is probably wrong. If one person thought this, then who knows, right? It's just a reader
Who knows?
preference. Yeah. But what happens when it's all over the place and what someone, a scene someone loves is another scene that someone didn't like, and something that you loved, like I loved about character, another person thinks the pacing is too slow, even though for me it's like, oh, but I love this person. And it's challenging, and that's the job of the author, is to decide, what am I willing to give up to tell the story I want to tell, regardless of whether or not, this is the story that X person would prefer it to be. So that's, that process in itself can be quite challenging.
And even with the developmental editor, right? I mean, you still had to learn to trust her, but also learn to trust you
Yeah.
and to be able to filter out those differences.
Yeah. A big part of that, I think, is, well, reading a lot. Because of this podcast, I read a lot of books. So I have learned a lot as I read. I think that helps a lot. So if I disagree with my developmental editor, which isn't very often, because she does a very good job in the feedback that she gives. So I don't disagree very often on big picture stuff. But I know I read enough to have a good, especially now with every book that I write, the more that I read, the more that I kind of pick up on the things that I know, a way I want to tell the story. And then I'm just
Right.
like, no, this is what I wanted to do, and I meant to do it, and that's just what I'm going to do. And that's part of the creative, it's part of the creative joy of being the author, and it's part of the stress of being the author.
Yeah, it's a great point though, because learning the craft is a process in and of itself, and I don't think it can be underspoken how much you can learn from reading authors whose work you admire, and reading authors whose work you don't, and
Yes.
realizing what you don't like about what
Yes.
they've done. Again, personal preference.
Yeah.
I did work with a developmental editor on Deadly Vision, and not to talk about my book, but the history. It was a long gestational book. It took me 30 years from original conception to publication. And at one point, I'd gone to an editor who I don't recall. I don't ever remember having gone to whoever this person was. I don't even know who it was. I could tell from the handwriting that I believe was a woman, but I don't ever remember having worked with a female developmental editor on this story. And the comments, I guess I had sent her an outline and the first few chapters, and the comments were kind of, as somebody who's read Deadly Vision, it's like, this story should not escalate to murder. You do not need to get the politicians involved. This should stay in the hospital. And it's everything against what I did. And so at that point, I had to say, no,
Yeah.
that's not what I want to tell. That's not the story. And so as an author, you had to believe in your story. Beta information, developmental information, the alpha readers now that are getting it all. You have to believe in your story.
Yeah.
So what made it so compelling to you that you devoted a year of your life ish to getting that story out there, and you never gave up on it? You never quit. You persevered. You suffered.
Yeah.
Why? What?
It was just the story I wanted to tell. That it's a good question, but it's hard to put into words, because it was just, I knew I loved the idea of autonomy, especially like, I mean, I kind of already talked about with technology and questioning that. I knew it was a topic I wanted to explore in the breakdown of a person. And I just knew that that was the right next story for me. So I went with it. And yeah, I don't doubt myself during the process. I know some writers do talk about that, how they want to jump projects and things, but once I get started, I'm all in. I'm ready to go. I at no point during writing this book did I think, oh, this is no good. I'm going to start another book with my next greatest idea, even though I have ideas as we go along, as I went along. That kind of
Right.
thing just doesn't happen to me. I get locked into a story. I get locked into the characters, and I just roll with it.
Well, personally, I'm glad that you didn't give up on it
Thank you.
because I have a copy. Well, I only, by the way, I only have a
Yeah,
PDF
I will
copy.
send you a paperback. Yeah.
How much research did you do for this?
Oh, a lot. And there are rabbit holes. I'll try to high level this. I mean, from the simple thing of Boston, I've only been to Boston once, so in my mind, I have.
You've only been to Boston once because
Yeah.
it reads like you are, standing on a street corner in Boston.
Thank you. That was research. I've been to Boston once. I knew the seaside port. I knew kind of the high tech vibe, but that's all just that one time, that one memory from years back. So I was pretty much Google mapped it. I went on Google Map. I went to Street View and I walked around Boston via Google Maps. A couple of beta readers had been to Boston, knew Boston well, so they were able to like point to little things for me, which is nice when you have that.
Yeah.
So that was like the Boston side, and then there was, of course, the what is happening right now with VR therapy, because VR therapy is something that is being used, of course, not to the immersive extent that I get into, but I wanted to understand what they were doing, how they were applying it to real humans, so that I could make it as realistic as possible. There was research into what I, if we ever do get to immersive virtual reality, how do I think it would happen? Like, what is the most likely way we are going to get to immersive like that? Because right now we have walking treadmills, and I considered using like walking treadmills and goggles and things, which is kind of at the peak of where we are right now. Considered it, but I wanted to go a step further into complete immersion,
Right.
and then
Right.
that was research into what would have to happen in the human mind in order for this to work. How do we get pictures into our brain? How do we get a human into a dream state in order to force put pictures into the human brain, as if, because the idea behind my tech was that you would essentially lay down in a chair. You have this crown, which we call it a crown in the book, and it basically with a cocktail of helpful drugs, you end up in a dream state, and you're fed these images through this machine. I say it a lot more technically in my research in the book. I couldn't tell you how I said it now, but that, looking into like what can we do right now, because right now we can only do like, I think spots is as far as we've gotten. They can force like dots into someone's mind via this method, but we're very far from that level of immersive technology. So that was on the research side, and of course there was also the psychological side, someone's mental breakdown. Lucas, being a psychologist himself, what would his company, and there's, of course, you have to understand it's fictionalized, so not everything is realistic. Just like in crime thrillers, everything the detective does is not realistic. We have to move the story a little bit. So,
Yeah.
but the psychology of like what would happen in his clinic if he was in this situation, how would he think as a psychologist about his own situation? One of my beta readers is also a psychologist, which also has helped make the book a lot stronger
Yeah.
as well, because she went through the book and said, no, this is what we would call it, or this is what he would say, or this is what he would think. So that was helpful as well in the final product of bringing that psychology, his profession, to life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, having delved deep into virtual reality medical in my book, I was with you. Just, where can we take this technology? Have you ever been inside of virtual reality other than just a video game?
Other than for a video game application, no.
Yeah. Okay. Your sessions seem very real. You've mentioned the rock climbing.
Yeah.
It was only a couple of sentences into the rock climbing experience in virtual reality where it's just, this guy's a rock climber. I mean, you're a rock climber. You've got the details down. So I know you didn't have to research that part.
No, not very. No, that was pretty easy. Yeah, yeah, that all came naturally. Yeah.
So when the whole thing is said and done and people have had a chance to read it, which again, congratulations on being published today.
Thank you.
And we'll talk a little bit about the publishing process in just a minute. With all things being said and done, what is it that you would hope your readers get out of this, out of their experience with this book?
I think number one is entertainment, to just an escape from the normal everyday life. I think that's why most of us write. That's what got us into, like, when I first started reading books, or when I got even more into books, I guess I should say, it was the story, it was the escape. It was that, being there with those characters on an adventure that I loved. So that's like number one, is what I want to pass on, is just, you went on this adventure, whatever's going on in your real life, you had a break from it because you are immersed in this story. And then on the slightly darker side, I guess, I also would hope that people think about what they see visually and what they're being fed, and whether or not, we're losing that sense of autonomy like Lucas does. Even though I go extreme in immersive technology, which would be a lot more powerful in order to manipulate somebody, I still think, even with today's technology, that there is the potential, if not outright manipulation of people, as you see with these big meta court cases and things going on, where people are addicted, they're being manipulated via these algorithms. So I guess part of the book is that, like, part of the, the stories, when you put it down to think, like, man, like, this could go very wrong for anybody if they allow themselves to just follow along without thinking clearly.
Sounds like it was just ripped out of today's headlines with the lawsuit against Meta, and how all the algorithms are intentionally addictive and
Yeah.
problematic,
Oh yeah.
harmful.
Yeah. Yeah, when you look at AI as we move forward and how it's taking over, and the new movie that just came out, I think it just came out a week ago. I can't remember what it's actually called now, because I've only just doing my research for it. I knew it was coming out, but the essence of that, is AI going to help solve all our problems, or is AI going to destroy humanity as we know it? And
I have a pretty strong opinion on that one.
yeah, well, that's it, right? And that's my next book. Who knows what'll happen in my next book with, as I advance this story of what, yeah, where is this technology going to go?
For people who are writing, let's just dig really quickly deep down into your writing process. When you're working, how many hours a day do you write?
Actually, write, well, it would depend on how deep I am in the writing. So I spend probably 2 hours, a day every day for months, until the first draft is finished.
Do you have a goal per day, what you want to accomplish?
It's usually time based. So I force, yeah. So it'll be like an hour and a half of writing. It really depends on what I have going on, because I have essentially a tracker, and every day I have, like, I need to do an hour and a half of writing, an hour of editing, an hour of marketing, and then of course I have my other businesses and the podcast. So I have all these things, and I know if I don't take time to do all these individual things, that I'm gonna you just forget something, and then it gets delayed and delayed and delayed. So an hour and a half is typically minimum, but then editing also goes into there. So you could say 2.5 hours, depending on where I am in the process.
Editing what you just wrote, or editing earlier stuff?
Could be either. Sometimes I'll write a short story and give it away to my Patreon members. Okay. And so I might be writing and editing a quick short story. I tried dictation for fun to see if I could dictate a story, and I did. I did.
Can you do it?
Yeah. Well, you know what? Funny thing is, so I dictated it while I was walking dogs, but during the dictation, as I'm reading this story that I wrote, I could tell when someone's talking to me or when the dogs are doing something they shouldn't, because I'll be reading the story that I'm talking, and then all of a sudden there's like this complete nonsense of, like, what are you doing? Get back here.
No, don't poop there. Don't poop there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had to, like, separate. Wait, was I actually writing, talking, or was I socializing with someone? Because I don't know what the hell any of this means.
Is that the name of the story? Don't poop there.
No, it was a pretty dark psychological. It was a Christmas one, actually. Yeah, it was fun.
I can't dictate creative writing. It's the speaking process and the writing process for me come from two different parts of the brain. And I need to actually see the words forming on the page as I'm writing it,
Yeah.
because that's what kind of keeps me in touch with the flow, that the drive to get the page to turn. It's a lot of it is visually, the way the page lays out for me. I just think if I try to tell a story, it taps into a different part of my brain. The adjectives that I would use, the descriptors, it'd either be too flowery or not flowery enough. I can't do it. I need to write.
Yeah, I don't think I did it very well. I think I rewrote that story several times, and I haven't really done it since because it's a lot of work to try and figure out what the hell I was talking about.
So when you finish your first draft or your second draft or what have you, do you put the story in a drawer, so to speak? And if you do, for how long?
No. The drawer it goes into the next process. So I wrote the first draft. I don't even think I took time. I knew what I wanted to do for the second draft and things I had to fix because I'm making notes along the way in Scrivener. So I go straight to the second draft. Then with the developmental editor, I get a couple of weeks of break or whatever because she's working on it. Same with the beta readers. When they get it, I get a bit of a break.
And you don't work on it while the development editor has it. You're not changing little things here or there. You can actually put it away.
Yeah. Because I don't know, because I only worked so hard on it, especially with developmental editing, because she could throw a wrench in the entire system and say, this is terrible and here's why. And then, because it happened to me once, this is none of the books that I published, but one of the books that I wrote that will probably never be published. I sent it to a developmental editor, a different one, not the same one I have now. And she came back with like, yeah, this story is a mess, essentially. And she listed like all the things that were wrong. And she was right the whole way. Like I couldn't argue, but yeah. So now I don't. Yeah. So now I don't. I'm like, okay, my developmental editor needs to tell me, because if I need to rewrite half this thing, I'm not going to like try and make it perfectly polished and then pay to someone to edit it and then rewrite the whole thing because they thought it was junk. So I have that, even though she never tells me to do that anymore. There's that fear because it happened once. There's that fear deep inside that any developmental editor is just going to come back to me at some point and say, this is awful. What were you thinking? To try this instead, right?
But that's a great point for writers to learn that balance between trusting your instincts and trusting the outside ear, for the writing.
Yeah.
The hardest thing in the world is to put a story in the drawer, because you're in it, you're on it, you want to get it done, you want to get it right, you got to finish it. I know a lot of craft books will tell you put it away for 6 weeks, which is beyond painfully impossible, I would think. Having said that, I put Dead Division away for 15 years at one point. But it did give me an interesting perspective when I finally pulled it back out. So I think it's interesting how everybody's crafting, the physicality of their crafting is so different.
My goal is to write 2 books a year. Not that I've been able to pull it off very well, but my goal is to write for 2 books a year. And when you look at my whole process from beginning to end, it's about 6 months long. So there's almost it can be done, but there's almost no room for error, which creates,
or for outside life.
Or we could get we could get into that, but the second hardest part of writing this book was like burnout and complete exhaustion from trying to do so many things and running 7 days a week.
Yeah, and balancing life. Yeah. There are other commitments that you have to attend to or want to attend to.
Yeah.
So the balance is always a tough thing, I think, for anybody who's in the writing process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So today's the publication. Yay!
Yes.
Yay! I don't have champagne. I got water. Here, cheers. Tell us about publishing it. What obstacles did you run into? How was that process for you? It's one thing to write it. It's another thing to actually have the physical product in the world.
Oh, yeah. It's I don't know. It's surreal, I guess. I'm so busy for so long every day that I don't even really get the time to stop and think about it. I don't think I've really had a chance to stop and actually think about that, about the fact that it's alive now. I'm so busy. You get so busy going from the readers to this draft to is this perfect as you have to, because I prepared the template like for the book to go into. So when you actually get the printed draft and everything, what it looks like the afterwards and all that stuff, like all that prep I do myself, the marketing, getting it on KDP and wherever, like all those decisions. Yeah. It's like it all happens right up until the very last moment. And I don't think I've ever actually stopped to think about what I've accomplished. I'm not there yet. Maybe there'd be a good question for a couple of weeks from now, maybe when I've actually had a time to take a breath and think about the fact that I've accomplished putting another book out there. But it seems to just be like, well, what's next? This one's out there now. Let's go jump into writing the next book.
And you've published several of your books on your own, so that process is kind of routine for you now. You've gotten through the initial hurdles.
I think there's so much to learn, and the industry changes so fast that staying on top of it is still, I'm sure in the traditional publishing industry world, it's somebody's full-time job. When you're doing it all on your own as an independent author, it's your job to stay on top of trends. So in one sense, yes, it's not so hard for me to pick my keywords, or I know how I go about picking keywords and categories. But at the same time, every time the industry makes a change, you have to kind of adapt to that. What's popular? What's the popular social media? Who's saying what? What's actually going on right now in the industry? So I could promote my book in a way that people are actually the most interested because of what's trending, right? And that changes all the time. So there's still a lot to keep up with, even when
marketing is brutal. Marketing is brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've been going for about an hour now, so we should probably wrap this up. So what advice would you give new writers?
I would say to be persistent, to be resilient, to know that your first book, if you've only written one book, may not be the book that makes you famous. 1% of authors write a book or less, probably statistically now, that write a book, put it out there, and it becomes like a #1 bestseller. That's a dream. That's winning the lottery. You probably have better odds of going out and playing the lottery and making millions off that than you do having a #1 bestseller. The persistence and the resilience to know that if you can just keep writing books and keep marketing and keep trying different things and watch what happens with sales and watch how things progress in the face of a very difficult industry to be in, because it's a creative world, that you will eventually get there, and you have to love the process as part of that resilience.
Yeah, I like that. Love the process. In the end, that's what it's got to come down to. Because if you're hating every step of this, it's just misery.
Yeah. Nobody writes multiple books who's only trying to make money. You start off, you're writing books just for the passion of it. You have to.
Yeah, I agree with you. So should we get into a final wrap at this point? How would you like to go from here?
Yeah, we can go.
I'm just the guest host.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can say where you can find my books. You can find The Treatment Room is on Amazon as far as a digital, and you can find it anywhere on paperback and hardcover. The best place to go is probably my website, because you can find all my books and everything on my website. And then if you have any questions, spoiler-full questions a couple of those, if you want to ask, we can jump into those.
Okay, so these are real spoiler questions.
Yeah, so a warning to the audience, now's the time to hit pause. If you haven't read the book, go buy it and read it. And it's on sale today. If you're listening today, it's on sale for 99 cents for a week before it goes back up. It's on Kindle Unlimited, so you can read it there as well.
Okay, so spoiler questions. I think one of the characters which you did very well, which was always a nebulous character, forgive me, I don't remember his name, but it's the CEO of Pinnacle.
Tristan.
Yeah. Talk to us about him and the nebulous nature of his character.
I wanted people to think, oh, it's going to be it's always the CEO. He's always the evil one. It's going to be him. And as Amara is questioning it herself, as a reader, you're also questioning that. So I wanted him to say things and do things where you're never quite sure of his moral code. And intentionally, he's a good guy doing some wrong things. He's almost like an everyday, well, maybe not in the CE. I don't know that many rich CEOs, but what I would think of if he wasn't a bad person was like he's kind of he's a wealthy person. He's had success. He does wrong things, but he's still a good person. And I think, especially at the end of the book, a lot of people ask me, those who have read it have asked me, what, like, how did you intend for me to feel about Tristan? Because I'm not sure how I felt about him. Was I supposed to hate him? Because I didn't hate him. Was I supposed to like him? Because I didn't necessarily like him.
You didn't know if you could trust your feeling about liking him.
Yeah.
And that's good writing, man. I mean, because it's too easy to make you hate a CEO. I mean, come on, they're vilified every day for many wrong reasons, actually. I mean, not that they're not reasons to vilify them, but being successful in and of itself isn't a reason to vilify somebody. Not when you put it on the world scale of what perhaps they're bringing to the world in terms of economic growth and jobs, and et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, it is profit.
Yeah.
And we all believe that any CEO will do anything for profit to maintain their power. You did a really good job of the nebulosity of Tristan. So I can see why people would say that, because of course he comes across immediately as the slime bucket, you know. And then when you find that you're kind of liking him, you don't trust whether you can trust yourself to actually like him. You don't want to invest that into somebody who's just going to turn around and betray you.
Yeah.
So that was nice.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Intentional the whole way, and a lot of fun to create that nebulous nature of his whole character. And even in the end, I don't like, it almost comes down to the individual. Like, is what he allowed Lucas to do, to go back into the machine when he knew there was something wrong, like, does that make him a bad person? Like, some people may think yes, some people may think, oh, he was just trying to figure out what was wrong with his technology. Like, both can be true. And I think he's probably one of the most nebulous characters, I guess you could say, of that I've written, because you're gonna have that. Did he do the right thing? Is he a bad guy, or is he not? It's not clean cut with him.
Well, then there's another character who, still in his own worldview, would be considered a nebulous character, and that would be Lucas's father and Amara's father.
Yeah.
And being the catalyst, really, for this entire story. So what were your thoughts there?
He was, I knew, well, because this was a Genesis project too, originally, Patrick, if you've read the Genesis project, for those who have, this might be.
He's in Genesis project?
No, but it was his character, like Blake, who is in the Genesis project, was going to be, so he's like the protagonist of the Genesis project. His name is Blake. This book was going to be, because it was originally going to be Genesis Project 2, Blake was actually going to be Patrick, but I mean, the plot was different. But the idea of him having dementia and being in and out of who he is as a person was part of that intention. Because I wanted, he's, like you said, Patrick is far more villainy to me than nebulous, because of how he treated his kids. Yes, you have the research angle, which was his belief, and you have him coming in and out of dementia, at the same time feeling bad for what he did. And we know in the end that he wanted to fix things, and then he's essentially, the machine is what, Vera is the reason why he ends up with dementia in the first place, with how bad it gets. So he was always kind of a villain to me, but at the same time, I think all villains need to have redeeming characteristics. Like, villains are the heroes of their own story, right? So even in and out of his dementia, I wanted him to almost be the hero of his story, which he was. In his mind, he was the hero of his story almost the entire way through, right?
Yeah, and that comes through very clearly. And it just brings up the whole ethical, question of, do ends justify the means?
Yeah.
What is the morality of research?
Yeah.
Which goes back, hundreds, if not thousands of years. What is the morality of that?
Yeah.
That's well done.
Thank you.
At this point, where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, we can wrap up the main show. And if you have a few more minutes, we'll stick around for the after show for the
Okay.
Patreon members. And for everyone who's listening, thank you. Thank you for being here, Todd. I really appreciate you being the
It was
host.
fun.
This was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was nice it's fun to get interviewed for a change. And
Am I the first host ever on your show?
yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice, nice.
Yeah.
Do I get a badge, like a little
I'll see
pin I
about
can wear?
sending you a badge. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being the host. I really appreciate it. And to everyone listening, have a great day.
And congrats on completing a very, very remarkable achievement.
Thank you.